Word is out and the process is underway of Kirk Cousins finding his new destination. Free agency is happening today. It's here. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that? 3, 1, 2, 3. You like it?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to Locked On Vikings every single day. My hashtag everydayers, I appreciate you all so very much. If you are new here, hello, welcome. My name is Luke. You can find me wherever you find your favorite podcasts, Monday through Friday, including the SiriusXM app. You can also find this show on Amazon Fire or Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So, here we are, folks. You all saw the NFL Network report from Tom Pelissero and Ian Rappaport that Kirk Cousins will hit free agency today as the tampering window opens. This show will be up shortly before the tampering window opens, but there's a decent enough chance that you're listening to it after tampering has started, and there's totally other news to happen. Things are going to run at a really breakneck pace now, so make sure you check back in here every once in a while, especially if you're watching on YouTube. I'll have YouTube shorts that are a little bit more live, and then we'll have shows every morning recapping what happened the previous day. So, Kirk Cousins has been, let's be honest, he has been negotiating for a couple weeks now with other teams in maybe an informal setting, not necessarily truly hammering out deals, but he's been at least feeling out the market. We've known this. Kevin O'Connell basically admitted it on NFL Network on the Combine broadcast. So it's not even that well kept a secret, but every reporter has had that also. So you don't have to take my word for it. But that is informal. It's unofficial. We now get to officially negotiate here. We get to see that. And his suitors, according to Tom Pelissero, Atlanta Falcons and Denver Broncos. Falcons are the main suitor. That's the name we've been hearing everywhere. But the Vikings are not out of it. Everybody wants you to know, hey, the Vikings are still very much trying to get something done here. They're still in communication. The door is still very much open. But what that sounds like to me is to be as good faith as possible to like tampering rules, that Mike McCartney has a sense for the market or what the market for quarterbacks is going to be. And he thinks that whatever the Vikings have offered Kirk Cousins, he thinks that Kirk Cousins can beat that on the open market. I don't think that's a very bad take at all. I think that's actually, if I were Mike McCartney, I probably would approach that the same way, because the Vikings have very much had a line in the sand. This is Ben Gessling's reporting at Star Tribune. The Vikings have been very hard and fast with their line. What they will not guarantee Kirk Cousins in terms of money. Now, what that actually is, whether that's 2 years or 3 years or like where that line is, I'm personally not I'm a little fuzzy on. But whatever it is, they've been very rigid about it. And they have been very clear with Kirk Cousins. We'll guarantee you this. If you want to get more guarantees, we are at peace with you going out and getting that. That's fair enough. Because we don't think that's a good deal for us anymore, and someone else can go make that mistake. That's essentially what they're telling him. And so he's going to do that, and he's got every right to do that. Kevin O'Connell has even said he's earned the right to be a free agent, and he's now going to be a free agent. So the next 2 days are going to be really weird, because technically Kirk Cousins can't put pen to paper on anything except for a Vikings deal. The Vikings can still extend him if they want to, regardless of tampering. They could do it right now if they wanted to. But they clearly haven't. And then come Wednesday, I believe at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock Central Time, then he becomes a true and earnest free agent. All of the dead money on his contract will void out and accelerate, become the $28.5 million dead cap hit that we've all been looking at here, and he will go out onto the market. And I think from that moment, it gets really difficult to see where the Vikings find a way to bring him back. Not necessarily because that's a prohibitive, like they could still sign a different quarterback and make that work under the cap. That would be fine. We've done a lot. If you're curious about how that stuff works, I've done a lot of different versions of like salary cap exercises and talked about it in previous episodes, so I won't rehash it, but go listen to those if you're interested. But more that it's just so much easier to do it now. Right now, the Vikings have an advantage. Until Wednesday, the Vikings have the advantage of being able to get Kirk Cousins to put pen to paper right now. The Atlanta Falcons, they don't have that advantage. Denver Broncos, Patriots, whoever else you think maybe will be involved, they aren't allowed to do that. Only the Vikings are. Until Wednesday, when everybody can make him put pen to paper, and the Vikings are dealing with an insanely huge cap hit. Well, not insanely huge. It's not Russell Wilson's cap hit. But they're dealing with a $28.5 million speed bump in that process now, and it gets a lot harder to make that contract work under the books than it would be if they did it right now. So if you're the Vikings, if you're going to do this when it's easy, not when it's hard. So I say, look, if we don't know anything by Wednesday and Kirk Cousins becomes a free agent, like a true and earnest free agent, I would say you can pretty much put it in pen that he's gone. And then we move on and we look on to whatever the next thing in the quarterback market is, whether we, talk further about rookie quarterbacks, which I'm sure we will do a lot of, or we start talking about, bridge guys like Sam Darnold or Gardner Minshew or Jacoby Brissett, like those guys, which I'm sure if Kirk does indeed walk, I'm sure the Vikings will bring one of those in, kind of regardless of their intentions of drafting a quarterback, because you do kind of need somebody like that to pair with a rookie just to tide things over, if not be like a backup plan in case he gets super worked over in the draft, which can happen. There are risks to letting Kirk Cousins go. I think everybody's pretty aware of that. But perhaps they're worth reiterating. If you let Kirk Cousins walk, there is a world where you miss out on your quarterback in the draft, and now you're the team going, I guess we've got Sam Howell in a dream. This is what happened with Washington last year. They had a really bad year. Now they're picking second overall, and they've got basically their pick of anybody who isn't named Caleb Williams, and good for them. But it was rough. Like, dudes got fired over that, right? Like, Ron Rivera does not care about the draft pick that the Washington Commanders have anymore. He probably wished that things went a little bit differently last offseason. So that's what we're talking about. That is the risk that Kwesi and et cetera are making, especially if next year's QB class isn't very good and you're not very happy with it. What if you have the 1 overall pick in 2022 when all of the quarterbacks suck, right? No good quarterbacks came out of that class. That would not be like great timing, right? So you run these risks of actually digging yourself into this really deep hole. But I think everybody's understood that for a while. And if you want to talk about risk, Kirk Cousins himself represents lots of risks, right? He represents a week-to-week risk because he's had, week-to-week inconsistencies for the entire 6 years he's been in Minnesota. He represents the risk of investment, right? You're guaranteeing a whole bunch of money to a guy coming off an Achilles injury who's getting old. What if he starts to decline a lot? Now you're stuck with all this guaranteed money. You don't want to be necessarily doing that. So it's risky both ways. There's no safe way to be an NFL GM. That's not a thing, right? You're always trying to manage and take risks. And it appears right now that the Vikings have said, we will take the risk on Kirk Cousins, but only up to this point. We will risk this much on it. And if we need to risk more to get it, then we no longer see that as a good deal. They got time to change their minds. If he hits the market and you hear, hey, Atlanta's only outbidding you by $1. Are you sure this is like this hard of a line? Maybe the Vikings do, maybe something like that, right? Or maybe Kwesi wakes up in a cold sweat Tuesday night and says, you know what, let's actually get this done and let me guarantee another year that I wasn't willing to do beforehand. But the Vikings have sat on this line pretty hard for 2 years now. I don't know if this is the moment where they change their minds. If I am to just read the tea leaves and try to figure out what's going on. So Kirk Cousins becomes a free agent. We've got all kinds of other news going on in, we've got some last minute salary cap cuts elsewhere in the league. We've got some quarterback news with Baker Mayfield and Russell Wilson and how that changes things. So I want to talk a little bit about the quarterback market and how it looks for the Vikings moving forward and like how their options look. Plus, since free agency is about to start, we need to have the contract talk about how to read contract tweets, because if you just go like crazy because you see a 10-digit number on average annual value, you're basically just going to like have the wrong impression all the time. And maybe you're fine with that and you don't really care, and that's fine. But assuming you want to have a decent sense of where teams are at, we kind of have to talk about how to read these things. And I can help you out with that. So that's where we're going on next. Let's keep our eyes ahead of us. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether that's something cosmetic, like an LED headlight, or something under the hood. Your car is an extension of who you are. It is a everyday part of your life, and it's an expression of your style and your choices and the way you like to live life. So why don't you make sure you take care of that thing with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, that part is guaranteed to fit your car specifically every time, or your money back. And that can be a really difficult thing to navigate. So let them do that work for you. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you so much to those of you who have been hanging out every single day, my hashtag everydayers. But if you are new here, you can maybe go check out some of those other episodes. If you're interested in a particular rookie quarterback or a free agent idea, you can go look at that. Or if you're just a big-time Minnesota sports fan, head on over to Locked On Minnesota Sports. They've got a 24/7 live feed of all Locked On Minnesota sports shows, so you can just have Minnesota sports talk banging on your eardrums all day long. If that's what you're into, go check that out. So, elsewhere in the league, there are some possible options that have been taken off the table here, but teams have also been taken off the table. So, by my count, there are 10 teams in the NFL that are like looking to change who their quarterback is this year. Maybe there'll be some weird surprises somewhere. There kind of always is something crazy like that. But those teams are the Bears, the Commanders, the Patriots, the Falcons, the Vikings, the Raiders, the Broncos, the Bucks, the Steelers, and perhaps even the Giants. There's some whispers about them not being so happy with Daniel Jones. Well, two of those teams got taken off the board here, and two of the quarterbacks got taken off the board. Baker Mayfield returns to the Buccaneers. They were maybe going to let him go, and maybe Baker Mayfield went to somewhere else. But nope, as kind of expected, Baker Mayfield goes back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the contract that he signs might set a baseline for Kirk Cousins. So the amount that Kirk Cousins is looking at here, we're starting to hone in on what that might be. I've been working with Brad Spielberger's projections over at PFF, but those are always just like projections based on like history and stuff, not necessarily like reporting on how a negotiation is going. They can't even have that kind of negotiation technically. But now we're getting that kind of market information. So Baker Mayfield signs a 3-year, $100 million deal. That's like the reported value. 50 mil is guaranteed. It can get up to 115 if they like win a Super Bowl or whatever the incentives are there. So for Kirk Cousins, that sort of sets, okay, so Baker is worth this. How do you feel about how Kirk Cousins is worth compared to Baker? And you can start to come up with what you think his number should be, right? So Tom Pelissero, when he was reporting on Kirk Cousins hitting free agency, he also included the nugget that Kirk Cousins is looking at upwards of $40 million a year. And both he and Ian Rappaport really drove home, like they emphasized that he really wants fully guaranteed money. So a 3-year, $100 million deal with only half of it guaranteed wouldn't be enough, it sounds like, by that reporting for Kirk Cousins, both in total dollar amount and in guarantees. Sounds like Kirk wants to blow that deal out of the water. So with what Baker got, that doesn't help Kirk Cousins' market. Because teams are going to look at what Baker got and think, okay, are you like twice as good as Baker Mayfield? Are we really going to do that? Like that sets the market in a way that I think favors teams more than it does Kirk, if that was the expectation that Kirk had. Now, we'll talk about this later, but the dollar amounts that you will see thrown around in the next 3 days, a lot of them lie to you. All right, a lot of them are specifically constructed to be misleading. So always with a huge grain of salt, always work on the structure, always keep in mind the structure. But with Kirk Cousins, the structure is like part of this. He wants fully guaranteed, and that's always been the sticking point with the Vikings. So where I'm standing right now, if the Falcons offer him a contract that guarantees him more money and more years than the Minnesota Vikings do, that's it. It's over. Cousins might put pen to paper at 12:01 p.m. Eastern time. Like that could be it. That said, we're down to 8 QB needy teams. And you start doing this math and you think about, okay, who are the free agents out there? Because the other team that got taken off the board here was Russell Wilson going to the Steelers. He signed for the veteran minimum, which is $1.2 million, because he's still getting paid $38 million off the Steelers or off of the Broncos because of their guaranteed money debacle. and cutting him and all that stuff. Really unorthodox thing for the Broncos to do, but they're just trying to like cut bait and get out of that situation. And the Steelers are saying, all right, the Broncos are paying for our QB this year. Okay, so they're going that way. Personally, I wouldn't have been the biggest fan of Russell Wilson being in Minnesota. I just don't really think he's got it anymore, regardless of what he's getting paid. But all right, God bless you, Steelers. Good luck. That takes them off the board, so to speak. So the Bucs and Steelers are also two of the teams that were in the playoffs, right? So they're two teams drafting a little lower that were going to be a little bit more likely to go for a free agent, because them, having dreams of getting Jaden Daniels is pretty rough to think about, right? So cross them off the list. So we're down to the Broncos, the Raiders, the Vikings, the Falcons, Patriots, Commanders, Bears, and we'll say maybe to the Giants. That's 8 teams, 7 if you don't count the Giants. How many quarterbacks are available? If you count Kirk as one, like real life big boy quarterbacks, right? I'm not talking about Gardner Minshew's here. So Kirk Cousins is one. Justin Fields, I think, counts as one. I think a team might give him that shot. Justin Fields counts as one. And then I would say that there are 6 quarterbacks that are going to go to a team that like tries to make that dude the starter. So there's your 8, right? Somebody here ends up with Penix. That's the unlucky loser, right? That ends up, oh my God, we got Mike Penix, we got Bo Nix or whatever, right? Someone ends up with that guy, or is like trying to make a dream work with Spencer Rattler, or is saying, all right, fine, we will go with Daniel Jones again, right? If you take the Giants out of this equation, now maybe somebody's drafting Bo Nix to be backup or something like that, which can happen. Like somebody's going to fall further than you think, right? But if you start kind of crossing these out, okay, the Bears, they're Caleb Williams. That kind of feels like that cat's out of the bag. And the Commanders and the Patriots, maybe they draft a guy, and then maybe the Falcons get Kirk, and then the Vikings and the Raiders are the ones fighting over JJ McCarthy or Drake May or Daniels, whoever ends up available. Maybe the Patriots trade down because they're the team that gets Justin Fields, right? Like these are the kinds of little trigonometries that we got to do now, and how that affects the market. But obviously the first thing, and this is another thing that Rappaport kind of emphasized, is that Kirk Cousins has the first domino for a lot of teams right now. And that's not just because there's going to be a bunch of suitors. And it does sound like it's not going to just be the Falcons and the Vikings. It does sound like there's going to be other teams, maybe at least keeping an ear out to what that negotiation looks like, and if they can maybe get involved. But whatever happens there's like already 2 teams that are putting a whole bunch of other stuff on hold. So the Vikings have put kind of Danielle Hunter's deal on hold until they understand what is going on with Kirk Cousins, which I believe they learned what they needed to learn about that at the Combine. And there has been a report, I believe, from Jeremy Fowler at ESPN, or it might have been Dan Graziano, that said, okay, they're talking to Danielle Hunter now. So it's not on hold anymore. They have been negotiating with Danielle Hunter, according to that report. But depending on what happens with Kirk Cousins, they might still have to wait to pull the trigger on something with Danielle Hunter, who voids out at the same time as Kirk Cousins. So those 2 moves kind of go hand in hand. So let's say that you are a team that's interested in an edge rusher, say the Chicago Bears. And the Chicago Bears are saying, we really want Danielle Hunter. So we're going to maybe put this deal on hold until we see what happens with Danielle Hunter, which means we need to wait until that happens with Kirk Cousins. And the same thing is going to go on with Atlanta and Denver and whoever else. Everything's going to kind of wait on this because Kirk is the centerpiece of free agency right now, in that he is a quarterback and he's going to make a lot of money, and he's going to drastically affect the plans of a lot of NFL teams. So everything is just going to hold its breath for a minute until Kirk Cousins signs somewhere. And that might happen 2 minutes into the tampering window. By the time you're listening to this, it may have already happened. But that's sort of where we're at. And you're just going to have to find a little bit of patience. Speaking of patience, we have to have a little heart to heart that we always have to have this time of year about how to deal with, or how to read what goes on in free agency. Because if you take reports at face value of contracts, you are going to get some really, really wrong ideas. And that's by design. There are people out there that want you to get the wrong idea because it looks good for them or whatever. So let's try to be smarter than that. And let's try to be a little more critical than that and talk about exactly how to really judge a contract, or at least the way that I do it, to determine kind of how I should feel. Did they overpay? Did they underpay? That kind of thing. All right. That'll be next. Thank you so much to FanDuel for sponsoring today's episode of Locked On Vikings. It is March. That means it's March Madness in addition to, of course, free agency. And look, the bracket doesn't always go well for all of us. So FanDuel lets you bet on every individual game of the tourney, whether or not you even had those teams in that game in the first place. Whether it's a big upset or just trying to figure out something with an 8-9 team or whatever, go dancing with America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, or even the champion if you want to go crazy. But you can also just do Houston will be the 16 seed. They're probably a 1 seed, right? Whoever that is, you can get in on it. Just go bet on a South Carolina women's game. Put $5 on that, get your $200. 40-1 on a South Carolina women's game against a 16 team. I mean, my goodness, you're never going to get anything better than that. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, thank you all, everybody, for hanging out here on Locked On Vikings. It is now time for us to have a little conversation. Here's the deal. Contract reports lie to you. They lie to you all the time. They're designed to lie to you. And it's not that anybody's doing anything nefarious here, but there is truly a backward part of the negotiation is who gets to look good in this. And some people care about it a lot more than others, right? Some teams don't care about this at all. As long as we get the contract and we feel our value is good, we don't really care what people say on Twitter, but agents might care more. Especially considering how reporters get their information. It is often through agents. They often cite that agent and say, look, per blah, blah, blah management, this deal got done and here's the numbers. And what you will always see with a contract for any free agent, let's say Christian Wilkins. I know it's been reported that the Vikings are actually interested in Christian Wilkins. He is going to see free agency. He's a Brian Flores guy. He'd be a really, really exciting name. I'd be stoked on that. That'd be really fun. But let's say he signs for a deal, and I'm going to throw out a random number just to make it easy. That's way too low. I'll say $10 million just because it's an easy number to think. And if they say $10 million for Christian Wilkins for 4 years, so $40 million over 4 years, $10 million, there is a decent chance that is an overestimation. Just by nature of it being the average annual value. Almost always looks bigger than it actually ends up being. The big deal is the contract structure. And how contracts get structured, there's obviously all these different moving parts. And if you're not familiar with how signing bonus is different from guaranteed salary, is different from incentives to, likely or not likely to be earned. If you're not familiar with all of that, don't stress about it too much, okay? I do have a great video on my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBraun NFL. Just go to the Football 201 page and click on the video that says, Let's Count Beans. Go watch the bean counting video, and it'll give you a primer on all that stuff. But you don't have to stress too much about it. I don't want to give you homework. What you need to understand is that a lot of contracts are designed to have a nice, flashy number that Adam Schefter gets to tweet out and tag the agency in that they can then use in their portfolio when they are recruiting other people. But that number doesn't have to be real for them to use it in their portfolio. It just has to be technically what is on paper and not just an outright case of fraud. But let's say that you sign a guy the Michael Thomas contract was a great example of this. Michael Thomas got released by the Saints as a cap casualty last week. And he had a provision in his contract that was going to guarantee $119 worth of base salary. Now, he signed this contract when he was dealing with injuries and there was a lot of unknowns. And it was actually not unlike what the Vikings did with Danielle Hunter when he was dealing with his neck injury, is this kind of provisional thing. But they did it with a roster bonus. Michael Thomas did it with guaranteed salary or unguaranteed salary that would become guaranteed. Functionally, it ended up working out the same. But basically what that meant was that agent got to say, I negotiated a $120 million deal for Michael Thomas. Or the number was more than that because he actually did see some of that money. But, a big giant deal for Michael Thomas. But the Saints understood that if Michael Thomas didn't come back up, if he didn't come back from those injuries and he didn't, right? If he was not able to stay on the field and go back to being, the top 10 receiver that they viewed him as at the time, if he was that top 10 receiver, they would have been perfectly happy to guarantee all that money because he would have been playing really well. And so the way it worked out was they essentially worked out what the contract would be if he played well and then said, but you got to hit the condition, right? And almost make it like an incentive kind of deal. But for cash flow reasons, one of the things that teams need to deal with is if they do guarantee salary, they need to like have that cash on hand as a business liquid right away, which can be difficult to just like conjure $90 million, $120 million and like be able to put that in escrow. Like that's just hard to get all that money liquid and out of your assets. So sometimes teams will do that. They will have unguaranteed salary. The Vikings do this all the time. They'll have unguaranteed salary that guarantees a year before the year you would actually earn it, which essentially means you're going to be on a functionally uncuttable contract because you'll still have signing bonus. You'll have other guaranteed money. But when that money guarantees, then we'll be able to put it in escrow. And it's just like easier to do your taxes that way, but it functionally is guaranteed. It's going to be guaranteed money. That player's going to see that money. So with Michael Thomas, it wasn't anything like that. They just said, this is the big deal. If you are a superstar again, you get that money and that's fantastic. And Michael Thomas says, yes, I'll bet on myself, right? Most players will be pretty amenable to that unless they feel as though they've like earned more. But you understand when you're in an injury world, and this might be something that Kirk Cousins has to deal with, is this sort of provisional money or this sort of like not quite guaranteed, but could be guaranteed kind of money. He's pushing for fully guaranteed, but maybe that's something that might be a solution that someone comes up with, right? And then the Saints say, okay, and by the way, if we're 2 years after we signed this, and you're not the same guy, we're gonna axe you, and you're not gonna see that money. So we promised you that money, but you're not gonna see that money. And what that does in terms of tricking our lizard brains is when we go to the reporting of projected cap space, which is usually what you're seeing when you see somebody tweet, oh, the Vikings have 37 mil in cap, or they're gonna be 16 mil over the cap, or whatever the number is. That usually includes all that funny money. For example, the Vikings cap situation right now includes Harrison Smith making like $11 million that he's probably not going to see. He might not even play. He might retire. But if he doesn't retire, it's pretty likely that he's going to take a pay cut like he did last year. And the big, giant inflated number on his contract isn't actually going to burden the team. It's just right now it's a pinky promise. And unguaranteed salary is truly no more binding than a pinky promise. You got that player, you can restructure it, you can get rid of him, you can trade it, you can do anything. You can approach them and say, take a pay cut or we'll cut you and lessen it, right? Without actually losing the play. You can do all kinds of things with that unguaranteed salary to make that number go down that aren't, because I know some of you are going to freak out, that aren't doing like the void year restructure crazy thing. It's just money that was pinky promised. And so the way that I like to look at contracts around this pinky promise is once we know the structure and we can see the signing bonus and the salary payouts and like where all the money is, I like to say, okay, what's the out? So many contracts are, 5-year deals that really you're going to see 3 years of and then you're going to get cut. Or they're, 3-year deals or they're 2-year deals that could be extended or something like that, right? But so many deals, you're just not really meant to see that, or it's a 5-year deal and then you're going to get pay cutted or restructured or something's going to happen. Right. So I think, okay, how much money is this dude actually going to see? And that requires a little bit of predicting and speculation, but that's what we're going to do on this show. So if the Vikings say, get Danielle Hunter done to an extension, who knows if they will, but if they do, I'll look at that deal and say, okay, by the time he's 33, right, or 32 at this point in the contract, is he cuttable? Like, is this something where there's a bunch of dead cap, there's a bunch of guaranteed money? Will it be reasonable to cut him if he has gotten too old to play well, right? Which is going to be a possibility with Danielle Hunter, 32-year-old edge rusher, maybe you start to decline. If he's declining, can we cut him? For example, Harrison Smith right now, absolutely you can cut him. You save a bunch of money if you do that. That is absolutely a thing. So it's a lot easier for me to look at that money that he is promised and say, I don't know if he's going to see that. And if he doesn't see the money, it doesn't affect the Vikings, right? And that's what you really care about. I don't think you care about like the Wilf's pocketbook, right? Like you don't care about like how their finances are doing, I don't think, unless you're showing up with like go Ziggy on your post report. But I don't think that's most of you. I think most of you care about how salary affects the team. How you care about the opportunity cost, right? If we pay a whole bunch of money to this player, does that rob us of the opportunity to get a player we maybe want more? And so when we're looking at opportunity cost, you kind of have to see functionally, like you have to see the real amount that this player is going to make, because what they are promised has nothing to do with opportunity cost, because it's a pinky promise. And we don't respect pinky promises here, all right? Not since 4th grade. We grew out of that, okay? So don't get caught up in the pinky promise. That's the lesson of the day here. And as free agency opens up, I think we're going to be live on the Minnesota Football Party, or if not, we'll have a Minnesota Football Party out quick on Locked On Minnesota Sports that goes over probably. I'm going to guess that Kirk Cousins gets done pretty fast because so much other stuff is waiting on him and he's a priority for everybody. So I'm going to guess that answer comes pretty fast on Monday. Or at least information. If we find out that he's going to like wait and see more of his options or something like that, then we'll find out about that. But I'm going to guess we hear something one way or another pretty soon. And hey, with any luck, we'll be live when it happens. So go check that out at Lockdown Minnesota Sports. And then of course, tomorrow we'll do Twitter Tuesday. So you can ask me your questions and we'll cover whatever topics come up. I'm sure you'll have a whole bunch of questions about it. So we'll kind of cover it in that format. All right. Sound good? I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.